We're making a start here with a massive political fight that seems to have erupted over an interim report on oxygen supply in Delhi. In fact, this is a massive political row now, and the interim report is by the Supreme Court appointed panel on Delhi's oxygen requirements and demands. In fact, citing the report, BJP has said that there was gross discrepancy in actual consumption of oxygen versus what was demanded by the Delhi government when the oxygen crisis was at the peak in May. BJP accused the Delhi government, in fact, of inflating its oxygen needs by 4 times than what was required. Meanwhile, the Delhi government has refuted, saying that there is no such report that even exists at this point in time. And Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia further challenged the BJP to show the report.
ये अरविंद केजरीवाल जी द्वारा जघन्य अपराध है, ये क्रिमिनल नेग्लिजेंस है, क्रिमिनल नेग्लिजेंस। हम पूरी तरह से आशा करते हैं कि सर्वोच्च न्यायालय में अरविंद केजरीवाल अकाउंटेबल ठहराए जाएंगे। जो क्रिमिनल नेग्लिजेंस अरविंद केजरीवाल ने किया है उसके लिए वो अकाउंटेबल ठहराए जाएंगे और उनको पनिशमेंट, उनको दंडित किया जाएगा।
इस ऑक्सीजन ऑडिट कमेटी के सदस्यों से बात की, कई सदस्यों से बात की है। सबका यह कहना है कि उन्होंने तो कोई रिपोर्ट साइन ही नहीं की, अभी तक उन्होंने कोई रिपोर्ट अप्रूव ही नहीं की। मैं चुनौती देके कहता हूं कि रिपोर्ट लाइए, कहां है वो रिपोर्ट जिसको ऑक्सीजन ऑडिट कमेटी के सदस्यों ने अप्रूव किया हो और जिसको ऑक्सीजन ऑडिट कमेटी के सदस्यों ने साइन किया हो। लाइए वो रिपोर्ट कहां है। झूठ और मक्कारी की इंतहा होती है और भारतीय जनता पार्टी उस झूठ और मक्कारी के इंतहा पे पहुंच गई है, चरम पे पहुंच गई है।
So those were the reactions that came in from BJP Sambit Patra and Delhi Deputy Chief Minister as well. Now, essentially, this report talks about the Delhi's oxygen requirements and demands, and there are a lot of conflicting views in the report itself of what the Delhi government had said that was needed and what the panel, in fact, this is, remember, the Supreme Court appointed panel that was appointed to look into this entire issue, what that panel said about what Delhi government's, in fact, the city's requirement was. Let me, in fact, go across to Ayushman, who is joining us for more details here. Ayushman, of course, the political fight over this is one part of the whole thing. But before we get into that, if you can first tell us what this interim report is. Obviously, it's not conclusive. But even in the report that we've seen at this point in time, there is a lot of contradiction about the requirements of Delhi in terms of oxygen.
Well, this report in a way points out to the fact that Delhi government did not have much idea about the supply and demand of oxygen in the national capital when the peak of COVID second surge was there in the national capital. But this was not just the case with the national capital. In other parts of the country also, similar thing happened. But the observation which have been made here is that the tankers were not properly regulated. The hospitals' demand were very high. At one point of time, it has also been mentioned that there was some hospital where demand was very less. They had very less bed capacity, yet they were demanding more oxygen. There are names of 4 hospitals which have been indicated in the observation, in which it has been said that the demand of Delhi went up to more than 1100 metric ton. But when those hospitals were calculated properly, the demand was calculated properly, it dropped down to, the demand dropped down to 200. And that is from where the fact is coming, where it is being said that more than 4 times was the requirement. Now, the Delhi government clearly says that 2 of the members of this panel, one from the Delhi government and the other from the Max Healthcare, have not yet signed the report. Of course, this is the affidavit which has been submitted in the Supreme Court. The report has yet not been shared. The Delhi government calls this report fake, but the political bickering over this has started, and the BJP alleges that somewhere Arvind Kejriwal-led Delhi government failed to manage the situation of oxygen crisis in the national capital.
Yes, absolutely, Ayushman. Stay with us because I just want to go through the details of this report and then come back to you as well. Now, this report cites minutes of one of the 4 meetings held over Delhi oxygen needs. The panel highlights the demand cited by the Delhi government was 4 times than the actual requirement. The panel adds that in subsequent meetings, the Delhi government kept pegging higher demand even when several hospitals had negative requirements. In fact, they also then, Delhi government gave a point-by-point rebuttal saying that there has been an inconsistent and erroneous use of formulas to calculate the oxygen requirements. It's also very important here to highlight that the Delhi government and centre used 2 different formulas to reach a conclusion as to how much oxygen was actually required by Delhi at that point in time. Now, centre assumes only 50% of non-ICU beds actually use oxygen. Delhi government's formula states that all non-ICU oxygenated beds use oxygen. So, Ayushman, here are a couple of important points. One is, of course, the formula that has been used. We do know at the peak of the crisis when Delhi was, the issues of oxygen were coming up, there was a lot of places, in fact, every single bed that was in the hospitals were using oxygen. The demand was much higher. So the formula here being used by both sides, obviously, is slightly different.
Yes, and not to forget that even those people who were there in the mild categories, in some cases, even the home isolation people required oxygen. So the oxygen cylinders for filling up the oxygens at the centers was also, we were seeing a lot of crowd. So real data of analyzing as to how much of oxygen was needed during that peak time is really, really difficult because almost everyone who went to the hospital was in a need of oxygen. Now, if you go back to the scenario of second peak, you will recognize that there was a point when Delhi even demanded more than 700 metric ton of oxygen because more than 586 ton was the Delhi consumption that was being shown. And the hospitals, smaller, bigger, and even the medium hospitals, all of them were in the dire need of the oxygen, and the demand and supply was something that was not regulated as calculated on paper. So as the caseload increased, as the requirement increased, the government rushed towards, and we have seen on social media and also the Delhi government clearly stating that they are in short of the oxygen. Of course, there are points made where it has been said in the report that tankers facility was not there, but this would also have been the case with other states also. The most important aspect of this report is the fact where it has been said that because of the erroneous counting of 4 hospitals, the oxygen demand of the national capital went more than 800 metric ton. Now, the Delhi government clearly calls this report fake because till now, the original copy of the report where it has been submitted as to what was the actual reason why the deficit was there has yet not been shared, Avni.
Yes, and one more point, Ayushman, I just want to, go through with you with respect to, obviously, the one of the points which is only, has to be put into context, the fact that Delhi used 4 times or, asked for 4 times more oxygen than it was actually needed. If you can put that part into context, because that is in one specific time period and needs to be looked at in a certain way.
Yes, Avni, it is very, very important question because the demand of 1100 metric ton, more than 1100 metric ton was not for every day. It was on one time, and that too, the Delhi government is saying that they never demanded more than 700 metric ton to the point when the cases started coming down. They even said that we won't be requiring more than 700 metric ton. What the audit committee's report clearly hints towards fact that after they recalculated the calculation of oxygen allotment and consumption through their own understanding and their own protocols, what they found was 4 hospitals were somewhere giving the erroneous figure of oxygen consumption, and after they removed those 4 hospitals, the oxygen consumption quantity came down by 800 metric tons. So somewhere, if the demand was earlier of 1100 metric ton, it suddenly came down to 200 metric ton, and that is something which is being quoted everywhere. Now, the Delhi government clearly said that this is false, this is fake, because the two of the key officials in this audit team did had their dissent mentioned out there in that letter, and the final report is yet out. But one thing is for sure, that this report clearly pins the blame of oxygen menace that was there in the national capital on the shoulders of Delhi government, stating that somewhere the management from the Delhi government was not up to the mark, and also the system or collation of data as to how the oxygen consumption and demand is taking place is something that was not properly regulated by the Delhi government.
Yes, absolutely, Ayushman. Thanks for putting that into context for us. Of course, this is not going to go anywhere. We're going to have to keep tracking the developments because this has obviously turned into a massive political fight, and that only seems to be intensifying at this point.